All right, let's get digging. If you rub a balloon against your hair in a dark room, you can actually see tiny branching rivers of glowing purple static leaping from the plastic to your fingertips. It is a tiny, harmless display of plasma. But what if you walked outside, looked up, and saw that same branching electric fire magnified to 1 billion volts, stretching from the horizon all the way into outer space? Imagine a massive glowing humanoid figure burning in the heavens, so impossibly bright that it casts shadows in the dead of night. Mainstream anthropology often paints our ancient ancestors as simple people, terrified of thunderstorms and eclipses. When archaeologists find the exact same geometric stick figure carved into solid rock in the remote American deserts, the deep Amazon, the freezing Swiss Alps, and the isolated Australian outback, they lazily dismiss it. They tell us it is merely a coincidence. They claim it is just a generic way that primitive minds chose to draw a human being. But look closely at the unnatural bent shape of the legs. Look at the bizarre symmetrical dots hovering right under its arms. A child sketching a human does not add floating geometric dots to the ribs. This is not a human. This is a global warning. Separated by impassable oceans and thousands of years, 10 completely disconnected ancient empires recorded the exact same terrifying entity. Stick around for number 1 on this list, because we are going to look at the undeniable forensic anatomy of this drawing. By the end of this journey, we will reveal the highly classified modern plasma physics that proves exactly what this sky demon actually was, and why its sudden return is not just a myth, but a mathematical certainty. Number 10. Canyon de Chelly and the Navajo Nation, USA. Imagine standing at the bottom of a massive, echoing gorge in the American Southwest, surrounded by sheer, blood-red sandstones stretching hundreds of feet into the sky. The heat here in the summer is punishing, baking the desert floor into cracked pavement. Deep within these jagged canyon walls, the ancient Anasazi and the ancestors of the Navajo Nation went to extraordinary lengths to carve a very specific, nightmarish warning into the living stone. The indigenous people of this region did not view this entity as a benevolent creator. According to their oldest survival stories, there was a time when the sky turned into a roaring furnace. Fire rained down from the heavens, incinerating the surface of the earth. To survive this apocalyptic cataclysm, their legends say they were guided by the mysterious ant people, entities who taught them how to navigate deep underground, taking shelter in subterranean cave networks while the world above was sterilized by cosmic heat. The twisted, glowing figure they carved into the rock was the literal sky demon that was destroying their surface world. Mainstream researchers insist these ancient artists were just drawing local shamans performing ritual dances. But if this was just a local desert ritual, why does the figure have the exact same unnatural 90-degree bends in its arms and legs? And more importantly, how did a completely disconnected culture on the other side of the planet witness the exact same nightmare? Number 9. Sweden. Thousands of miles away from the scorching canyons of the American Southwest, the landscape transforms into the freezing, jagged fjords and glacial valleys of northern Sweden. Here, the air is thin and biting, and the ancient rock is scarred by the massive, crushing weight of forgotten ice ages. Yet, carved directly into these freezing northern stones, we find the exact same geometric entity staring back at us. The ancient Norse ancestors who inhabited this frozen wilderness did not have stories of ant peoples, but they carried their own haunting memory of a sky torn apart. Their oral traditions speak of Ragnarok, an apocalyptic end of days. Central to this cataclysm is Surtral, a massive fire giant who splits the sky open, bringing a devastating wall of flames that consumes the earth. But the fire was only the beginning. The Norse legends state that this cosmic firestorm was immediately followed by the Fimbulwinter, a sudden, brutal, and unnatural ice age that buried the surviving world in deep, unyielding snow. They carved this figure not as a god to be worshipped, but as the literal fire giant they witnessed tearing the heavens apart before the cold set in. Historians still debate whether these myths were inspired by harsh local winters or something much larger. But how could freezing Nordic tribes and desert-dwelling Native Americans share the exact same hallucination of a fire giant? The mystery deepens when we travel to a land entirely cut off from the rest of human history. Number 8. Arnhem Land, Australia. Deep in the remote red dust outback of Arnhem Land in Australia, you can find some of the most isolated and ancient cultures on the planet. This is a landscape of extreme survival, where the heat shimmers off the limestone and the isolation is absolute. Cut off from the rest of humanity for tens of thousands of years, the Aboriginal people here kept a perfect, unbroken memory of their history through the Dreamtime lore. Within these sacred ancient rock records, we find the exact same terrifying entity with bent limbs and a funnel-shaped head. The Aboriginal elders speak of a devastating fire demon that descended from the sun itself. According to their ancestral memory, this cosmic terror brought a heat so intense that it boiled the rivers, dried up the oceans, and forced the scattered tribes to abandon the surface entirely. Just like the Navajo across the globe, the Aboriginal tribes survived only by fleeing into deep, dark cave networks, waiting in the pitch black while the sky burned above them. Anthropologists often suggest that isolated cultures naturally invent similar myths to explain natural bushfires. But bushfires do not boil oceans, and they certainly do not appear as a massive geometric grid hovering in the atmosphere. If this global warning was truly visible from the deserts of Australia to the ice of Sweden, it must have been an event so massive it loomed over the highest peaks on Earth. Number 7. Switzerland, the Alps. But just as researchers thought they understood the limits of this phenomenon, a discovery in the thin, freezing air of the Swiss Alps threw all their assumptions out the window. High in the Val Camonica region, surrounded by towering snow-capped peaks and deep treacherous ravines, ancient alpine dwellers meticulously chipped away at the dark rock to leave a message. Here, at extreme altitudes, we find the sky demon again. Mainstream science casually labels these specific rock records as ritual hunting magic. They claim primitive hunters carved these shapes to ensure a good harvest of deer and ibex. But look at the carvings. The figure is flanked by bizarre, symmetrical, floating geometric dots perfectly tucked under its arms. Why would primitive alpine hunters, whose survival depended on accurate knowledge of their environment, waste precious calories carving floating geometric data points next to a human figure? A hunter draws a spear, a hunter draws an animal, a hunter does not draw a symmetrical energy grid. Some researchers interpret these alpine carvings as simple local deities, while others look at the striking mathematical similarities to other global sites and suggest an external cosmic trigger. What do you think? Were these hunters simply inventing modern geometry, or were they tracking a terrifying visual data point in the sky? The answer might be hidden in the darkest jungles on Earth. Number 6. Brazil, the Amazon. Imagine hacking your way through the suffocating dense canopy of the Amazon rainforest. The humidity is a physical weight, and the thick wall of green completely obscures the sky above. In the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the Amazonian basin, isolated indigenous tribes carved their own permanent records into hidden river boulders and dark cave walls. These deep jungle tribes, entirely insulated from the alpine hunters of Europe or the desert nomads of Australia, possess their own terrifying oral histories of a global cataclysm. Their ancestors passed down vivid warnings of a time when the sky literally fell and the sun went completely dark at midday. The heavens tore open, revealing a blinding, destructive force that shattered the jungle canopy and brought the world to its knees. They carved this exact same geometric entity not as a piece of decorative art just to pass the time. It was a traumatized, permanent memory of the day the sky ripped open over the rainforest. Skeptics argue that human psychology is hardwired to fear the dark, which explains the eclipse myths. But a solar eclipse is a dark circle, not a towering, glowing entity with bent arms and a funnel head. To understand the sheer scale of the heat this event generated, we have to travel to the very cradle of human civilization. Number 5. Armenia. Standing high on the rugged, wind-blasted Gegem Mountains in Armenia, you are in the shadow of the biblical Mount Ararat. This is a rocky, violent landscape, violently shaped and scarred by ancient volcanism. The ground beneath your feet is a testament to immense geological upheaval, a place where the Earth's crust has shattered and bled magma. Despite the vastly different geography, thousands of miles away from the humid Amazon, the exact same being is carved in the blackened, scorched stones of these highlands. The ancient people who lived in this cradle of civilization watched as their mountains exploded and the earth ruptured. But the carvings do not just depict the earth failing, they show the entity in the sky looming over the destruction. Did a massive, localized volcanic eruption just happen to coincide with a weird drawing? Or did the entity hovering in the atmosphere literally trigger the geological violence beneath their feet? Mainstream geologists prefer to keep celestial events and earthly volcanoes strictly separate. But if this sky demon possessed enough energetic mass to trigger tectonic plates and boil the rivers of Armenia, what did it do to the most vulnerable, delicate ecosystems on the planet? Number 4. Africa, the Sahara. Today, the Sahara is an endless, merciless ocean of scorching sand. The heat is lethal and the landscape is utterly devoid of life for thousands of square miles. But geologists know a shocking truth about this barren wasteland. A few thousand years ago, the Sahara was a lush, vibrant, green paradise, teeming with massive freshwater lakes, sprawling rivers, and dense animal populations. Hidden in the middle of this dead desert are ancient rock formations covered in carvings, and right there, alongside depictions of swimming wildlife and green pastures that no longer exist, is the sky demon. The ancient geologic record proves that the Sahara did not slowly dry out over millions of years. It turned into a desert with terrifying, unnatural rapidity. The people who lived in this once green paradise carved this entity as the cosmic heat baked their continent dry, vaporizing their massive lakes and turning their green world into an ocean of dead sand. Some researchers propose this sudden climate shift was a completely natural, slow-moving earthly cycle, but the ancient people who actually survived it drew the exact same terrifying figure in the sky as the aboriginals whose oceans boiled. And strangely, this wasn't the only discovery pointing toward a massive atmospheric anomaly. Number 3. British Columbia, Canada. Far removed from the baking heat of the Sahara, the Pacific Northwest of Canada is a damp, freezing wilderness of towering pines and crashing coastal waters. The indigenous tribes of British Columbia lived off the ocean and the thick, dark forests. They had no contact with desert nomads or jungle tribes. Yet, carved into the coastal rocks and woven into their oldest, most sacred traditional warnings is the exact same funnel-headed, bent-limbed entity. They didn't have towering pyramids or vast desert canvases, but they saw the exact same sky demon hovering above the tree line. This is a critical piece of the puzzle, because it proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that this massive glowing phenomenon was clearly visible across the entire northern hemisphere. It wasn't just a localized comet or an odd weather pattern. It was a stationary, monumental structure of light that wrapped around the curve of the Earth. Mainstream historians try to write this off as a shared archetype of the human subconscious, a psychological ghost. But the subconscious does not project highly specific, floating geometric dots into the atmosphere. To finally understand what those dots were, we need to hear the explicit warning of the people who knew exactly what was coming. Number 2. Nevada and Arizona, USA. Bringing our investigation back to the United States, we must stand on the windswept, high-altitude mesas of the Hopi Indians. The Hopi are renowned for their complex, incredibly detailed prophecies concerning the cyclical destruction and rebirth of the Earth. And carved directly into their sacred rocks, we find the same undeniable figure. But the Hopi did not worship this entity as a benevolent creator god. Their most guarded prophecies state that this figure appeared during the time of the blue star Kachina, a terrifying cosmic event that literally ripped the sky apart. According to their oldest traditions, when the blue star appeared, it caused the Earth to violently flip on its axis, reshaping the continents and wiping out the previous age of humanity. The carving is not a metaphor. It is a historical record of a massive pole shift triggered by a massive celestial anomaly. The Hopi explicitly state that this cyclical event will happen again when the conditions in the heavens align. But to truly grasp the terrifying reality of how a star could rip the sky apart and flip a planet, we have to stop looking at the locations and start looking at the microscopic, undeniable forensic anatomy of the drawing itself. Number 1. The dots anomaly, the forensic evidence. Forget the isolated deserts, the deep jungles, and the freezing mountains for a second. We need to look strictly at the forensic anatomy of this global warning. Specifically, focus on the two perfect dots or circles carved directly under the arms or hovering at the sides of the figure's waist. This is the ultimate anomaly that shatters the mainstream narrative. When a child or a primitive hunter draws a human being, they draw a head, a torso, arms, and legs. They do not magically decide to add floating symmetrical geometric data points to the rib cage. It defies all artistic logic. This specific detail proves that these ancient primitive survivors were not drawing a man. They were recording highly specific, technical data that they observed with their own eyes but could not possibly understand. What were these perfectly symmetrical dots? Why did 10 disconnected empires all make sure to include this bizarre geometric detail? The answer doesn't come from an archaeologist. The answer comes from a supercomputer, and it completely rewrites human history. Let's look at the science. To crack this global mystery, we have to turn to Dr. Anthony Peratt. Dr. Peratt is not a fringe historian. He is a world-renowned elite plasma physicist who spent his career at the highly classified Los Alamos National Laboratory. Dr. Peratt didn't study ancient rocks. He studied the most extreme, high-energy plasma physics in the universe. Using the world's most powerful supercomputers, Dr. Peratt ran simulations to see what would happen if a massive, catastrophic electrical discharge, like a solar micronova or an extreme coronal mass ejection, slammed directly into the Earth's magnetosphere. The physics are terrifying. When a million-volt solar blast hits our magnetosphere, it doesn't just create a pretty aurora borealis. It creates a massive, towering, highly visible column of glowing plasma in the sky. As this unimaginable column of electrical fire surges towards the Earth, the magnetic forces cause the plasma to pinch and fold in on itself. In physics, this is called a Z-pinch, and when Dr. Peratt looked at the supercomputer simulation of a massive Earth-ending Z-pinch, the glowing plasma took the exact undeniable shape of a stick figure with a funnel on the top and bottom. But what about the dots? The supercomputer revealed that as the plasma column pinches, intense, blinding radiation pools at the center of the structure. This creates two distinct glowing spheres of synchrotron radiation hovering right at the waist of the plasma column. The mic drop is absolute. The ancients weren't drawing a human. They weren't drawing a shaman or a god or a myth. They were painting the terrifying, glowing million-volt plasma column that stretched from the horizon into deep space during a global solar cataclysm. They were mathematically recording high-energy plasma physics. Our ancestors survived a cosmic nightmare. They hid in caves while the sky burned, and when they finally emerged into a shattered world, they carved a desperate, permanent global warning into the stone. They knew the sky could tear open. They knew the plasma demon was real, and they knew it operates on a cycle. If this glowing plasma demon in the sky was caused by a solar micronova, the heat raining down on the surface would have been unimaginable. In fact, it was hot enough to melt solid stone. Click the video on your screen right now to see the 12 ancient ruins that were completely melted by this exact cataclysm. I'll see you there.